Right now, while you are sitting here watching this, your body is quietly deciding whether the eggs you ate this morning are helping you or doing absolutely nothing. And 99% of people over 60 have no idea which one is actually happening to them. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Sandra. Sandra is 67, a retired postal worker from Virginia. For almost 20 years, her doctor told her the same thing every single visit. Watch your cholesterol. Limit the eggs. So Sandra did exactly what she was told. Egg whites only. No yolk. Ever. And on paper, she was doing everything right. Her numbers looked fine. But quietly, year after year, something else was slipping away. Stares felt heavier. Her reading glasses kept getting stronger. Her mornings felt foggy, even after a full night of sleep. And nobody, not one single doctor, ever connected those dots back to the yolk she had been throwing away for 2 decades. Here's the question I want you to sit with for a moment. Should you actually be eating eggs after 60? Or is avoiding them quietly working against you? Because right now, today, millions of people over 60 are operating on advice that is decades out of date. And it is not your fault. You were told to be careful. You listened. That is not a mistake. That is trust. But your body after 60 does not respond to food the same way it did at 40. It does not just get older. It adapts. The same breakfast, the same habits, the same routine can start producing a completely different result over time. And eggs are one of the clearest examples of that shift. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what eating eggs after 60 does to your muscles, to your memory, and to your eyesight. The cholesterol question finally answered with what the research actually shows. The 4 mistakes that quietly cancel out every benefit, even if you eat eggs every single day. And the exact structure, how many, prepared which way, paired with what, that determines whether eggs are working for you or doing nothing at all. Here is the part that makes me genuinely frustrated. This is not really about eggs. It is about a piece of advice that got frozen in time decades ago and never updated, even as the research kept moving forward. Somewhere along the way, a single nutrient, dietary cholesterol, got blamed for a problem that turns out to be far more complicated. And once that advice became common knowledge, it stopped being questioned. Doctors with 7-minute appointments do not have time to walk you through a full metabolic explanation of lipoprotein regulation. So the simple version stuck. Limit eggs, watch the cholesterol. And an entire generation followed it faithfully, you included, because you trusted the people guiding your care. That trust was not misplaced. But the guideline underneath it has shifted, and nobody sent out a memo to update what you were told 20 years ago. That is not your doctor's fault either. It is a systems problem. Short visits, outdated training on nutrition, and guidelines that take years to filter down into everyday advice. I am not going to ask you to throw out everything your doctor has told you. I am going to ask you to add this information to what you already know and bring it with you to your next appointment. I am not going to read you a textbook today. I am going to walk you through this the way I wish someone had walked Sandra through it 20 years ago. This information comes from published research, including work referenced by Harvard Health, the National Eye Institute, and the American Academy of Ophthalmology, and I will list those sources below so you can look them up yourself. And before going any further, type into the comments how many eggs you eat in a typical week. Just the number. I read every single one, and the pattern across this audience genuinely shapes what I cover in future videos. Now, before I go one step further, I need to draw a hard line. There are symptoms that mean stop watching this video and call your doctor today. Sudden vision loss in one eye, over hours or a single day, that is an emergency. Severe chest pain or pressure, especially if it spreads to your jaw or your left arm, that is an emergency. New, severe swelling in one leg with calf tenderness, that can be a blood clot, and it needs same-day attention. If any of that describes you right now, please stop this video and call your doctor. Eggs are not the answer to a medical emergency. But if what you are noticing is gradual, a little less strength each year, recall that feels slower than it used to, vision that has softened over months rather than days, then stay with me. This video is built for exactly that. Here is where this starts to matter. After 60, one of the most important changes in your body is something almost nobody notices directly. Your muscles stop responding the way they used to, not just the size of your muscles, the ability to respond at all. Researchers call this anabolic resistance. In plain language, your muscles now need a stronger signal to maintain themselves and rebuild. The exact same amount of protein that worked at 50 no longer produces the same result at 67, and that single shift changes how your whole body responds to what you eat. Maintaining muscle is not about vanity. It is about balance, mobility, and whether you can still carry your own groceries up your own stairs in 10 years. This is exactly where eggs become relevant, and not in a vague way. Eggs carry one of the highest biological values of any whole food, which means a larger share of the protein you eat actually gets converted into usable muscle tissue. So it is not only about how much protein you eat, it is about how efficiently your body can use it. And this is where so many people quietly go wrong. They increase their protein, but not their protein quality. The number on the label goes up. The results on their body do not change, and it feels like nothing is working, when really, the wrong type of protein was doing the work all along. But eggs are not just protein. They carry something your body increasingly depends on as the years go by. Let me ask you something. Have you noticed small changes in memory or focus? Nothing dramatic. Just a little slower to recall a name. A little more effort to concentrate than it used to take. Because here is what's quietly happening behind that. Eggs are one of the richest dietary sources of a nutrient called choline. And choline is required to produce acetylcholine, a chemical messenger your brain depends on for memory and focus. Most adults do not consistently get enough choline, and that gap becomes more important the older you get. So when someone increases their egg intake and notices clearer thinking a few weeks later, that is not a coincidence. There is a real, physiological reason behind it. Now here is a layer that gets harder to ignore the longer you wait: your vision. After 60, the retina becomes more vulnerable to stress that builds up over years: gradual loss of sharpness, slower adjustment in low light, age-related changes to the macula, the part of your eye responsible for the fine detail you use to read, to recognize faces, to drive safely at dusk. And this is exactly where eggs offer something very specific. The yolk contains two carotenoids called lutein and zeaxanthin, and they concentrate directly in your macula. Research has linked higher intake of these two compounds with a lower risk of age-related macular degeneration and better visual function over time. And here's the part almost nobody has ever explained to Sandra or to you. Egg yolks deliver lutein in a form your body absorbs more easily than spinach does. Spinach actually contains more raw lutein per gram. But that lutein is trapped inside a tough plant cell wall that limits how much your body can actually absorb. In an egg yolk, the lutein is already bound to fat, which happens to be exactly what your body needs to absorb it efficiently. Multiple studies have measured a higher blood response per gram of lutein from egg yolks than from leafy greens. One properly cooked egg yolk can deliver more usable pigment to your macula than a full cup of raw spinach. Let that sink in for a second, so a pattern starts to form. Muscle response slows down. Cognitive signaling slows down. Visual protection becomes more important than ever. And eggs support all three of those at the exact same time. Now here is one more piece most people never hear about, and it ties directly back to that immune resilience and bone strength that becomes so important after 60. Eggs are one of the few natural food sources of vitamin D, a nutrient that supports calcium absorption, bone density, and immune function. After 60, the skin becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D from sunlight, and many older adults run low without ever realizing it because the symptoms, fatigue, achy joints, slower healing, get blamed on simply getting older. Eggs also provide zinc and selenium, two minerals involved in immune defense and in protecting cells from oxidative stress. None of these nutrients work in isolation. They work as a system, and that system becomes more important to support, not less, the longer you live. Now here is something most people never connect to their afternoon energy slump: vitamin B12. Eggs are one of the more reliable food sources of B12, a nutrient your body absorbs less efficiently as you get older, partly because stomach acid production naturally declines with age, and stomach acid is what helps release B12 from food in the first place. Low B12 in older adults has been linked to fatigue, memory complaints, and in some cases, symptoms that get mistaken for ordinary aging when they are actually a correctable deficiency. I am not suggesting eggs alone solve every case of low B12. Some people need supplementation, and that is a conversation for your doctor and a simple blood test. But for many people, consistent egg intake is part of what keeps that number from drifting down in the first place. Pay close attention to this next part, because it ties everything together. None of these nutrients, the protein, the choline, the lutein, the zeaxanthin, the vitamin D, the B12, work in isolation inside your body. They function as an interconnected system. Your muscles, your brain, and your eyes are not separate projects competing for resources. They are all drawing from the same nutritional foundation. When that foundation is solid, all three tend to hold steady together. When it quietly erodes, often you notice the change in only one area first, your knees, or your reading, or your memory, without realizing the same underlying gap is likely affecting the other two as well, just more slowly or more quietly. This is usually where the real concern comes up: cholesterol. Because eggs contain cholesterol, and for decades, that was the entire reason people were told to avoid them. I understand that hesitation completely. It is not irrational. It is what you were taught. But here is where the science has genuinely shifted. When you eat cholesterol from food, your body does not simply dump that amount straight into your bloodstream. Your liver regulates cholesterol through a balance of production and absorption. In many people, when dietary cholesterol goes up, the body compensates by producing less of its own. This has been shown across multiple metabolic studies, and it helps explain why the response to eggs varies so much from person to person. In most healthy adults, moderate egg consumption has a relatively small effect on LDL cholesterol compared to other factors, like refined carbohydrates, processed meats, and trans fats. Some research has also shown that eating eggs can raise HDL, the cholesterol that helps carry the bad stuff out of your arteries and back to your liver. Now, I want to be honest with you, because not everyone responds the same way. Some individuals, sometimes called hyperresponders, may see a larger rise in LDL when they eat more eggs. Even in those cases, HDL often rises too, and the balance between the two numbers matters more than either number alone. If you have poorly controlled diabetes, a specific lipid disorder, or a family history of very high cholesterol, this is exactly the kind of thing to bring up directly with your doctor, because a personalized approach matters more than a blanket rule for everyone. I also want to address something else that comes up constantly in the comments on videos like this one: inflammation. Heart disease risk is not determined by cholesterol numbers alone. Chronic, low-grade inflammation plays a central role in how plaque develops inside the arteries over time. When eggs are eaten as part of a generally balanced diet, research has not shown them to meaningfully increase inflammatory markers in most people. But when eggs are consumed alongside a diet heavy in processed foods and poor metabolic control, the surrounding inflammatory environment can shift in the wrong direction. Once again, the pattern around the egg matters more than the egg in isolation. This is exactly why two people can eat the identical number of eggs and end up with completely different results. One person is eating them with sausage and white toast every morning. The other is eating them with spinach and avocado. Same egg. Very different outcome. There is one more population worth a direct mention here, because so many of you watching live with this every day. Type 2 diabetes. Eggs themselves contain essentially no carbohydrate, which means they have minimal direct effect on blood sugar. For someone managing blood sugar, that makes eggs a genuinely useful protein anchor, especially compared to a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast. The concern some people raise is around cholesterol in the context of diabetes specifically, since diabetes already raises cardiovascular risk on its own. The current research picture here is mixed and still evolving, and this is precisely the kind of nuance where I would rather be honest with you than overconfident. If you live with diabetes, this is a conversation worth having directly with your doctor, ideally alongside your most recent lipid panel, rather than relying on a general rule meant for the broader population. If this is starting to make sense, take a second and hit like on this video. It genuinely decides whether this reaches the next person who has been quietly limiting their eggs for years over advice from a decade they have already left behind. Let me show you what this looks like across 3 different people, because no two bodies respond in exactly the same way. And I think that honesty matters more than a single perfect story. I had 3 patients, all in their late 60s, all start the same basic shift, 2 whole eggs a day, around the same time. One of them, a former office manager, responded almost exactly like the research would predict: steady, gradual improvement in energy and focus over about 6 weeks. The second, a retired carpenter, saw faster changes in his vision than expected, but his cholesterol numbers needed closer monitoring, and I adjusted his overall diet around the eggs rather than the eggs themselves. The third saw very little change at all over 3 months, and when I looked closer, the issue was not the eggs. It was that he was still pairing them with bacon and white toast every single morning, which was quietly canceling out the benefit. 3 people, same starting point. 3 different outcomes. That is not a flaw in the research. That is simply how human bodies work. Your result will not be identical to anyone else's, and that is exactly why the pattern around your eggs matters as much as the eggs themselves. Now, I want to tell you the rest of Sandra's story, because I think it explains this better than any statistic can. Sandra represents a pattern I have seen play out again and again in people her age. For nearly 20 years, she ate egg whites only, paired with oatmeal and whole grain toast most mornings. Her blood work looked stable. Her doctor told her she was doing everything right, but she was quietly losing function. Climbing to her grandson's 3rd-floor apartment had become a small ordeal. She needed new reading glasses, glasses she had not needed 2 years earlier. She woke up, tired most mornings, even after 8 full hours of sleep. I remember the appointment where it really came up. She sat across from me and said, almost laughing it off, "I just thought this was what 70 looks like." Picture her shrugging, the way people do when they have quietly accepted something they should not have to accept. That sentence stayed with me, because it was not true. What she was describing was not simply aging. It was a nutritional gap that had been building for 2 decades, one small substitution at a time. Her diet was technically balanced, but it was missing 2 things her body now needed more than ever: high-quality protein and the fat-soluble nutrients that only live in the yolk. The egg whites gave her protein, but they stripped out exactly what makes an egg uniquely valuable after 60. When I walked her through the research, she was skeptical at first. I remember her saying, "You want me to just start eating the part I have been throwing away for 20 years? That is a fair question, and an honest one." So she started slow. When Sandra shifted to 2 whole eggs a day, yolk included, soft, boiled, or poached, paired with a small serving of sautéed greens, the first week was unremarkable. She told me later it felt almost anticlimactic. Nothing dramatic happened, and she nearly went back to whites only out of habit. By 4 weeks, she said the stairs felt steadier under her feet, something she noticed almost by accident, the morning she carried groceries up without stopping to catch her breath halfway. By 8 weeks, her morning reading distance had improved enough that she set aside the newest pair of glasses, the ones she had bought only 2 years earlier. By 3 months, her blood work still looked stable, and she had quietly regained function she had assumed was simply gone for good. She told me, almost sheepishly, that she felt a little embarrassed it had taken her 2 decades to ask the question. Now, I need to be clear with you here. Sandra's results were on the better end of what I typically see. Some people notice changes faster, some slower. What matters is the direction, not the exact timeline. And her case does not replace your own doctor's guidance. It is one example of a pattern, not a guarantee. So now the real question. How many eggs should you actually be eating after 60? Large observational studies have consistently shown that around 1 to 2 eggs a day is not associated with increased heart disease risk in generally healthy people. But after 60, the goal shifts. It is no longer just about avoiding risk. It becomes about maintaining function. Muscle, memory, vision, metabolic stability. And because of that anabolic resistance I described earlier, your body now typically needs roughly 25 to 35 grams of high-quality protein in a single sitting to meaningfully stimulate muscle maintenance. 1 egg alone rarely gets you there. This is where so many people unknowingly fall short. They treat eggs as a small side item instead of the foundation of the meal. For most people, that functional range ends up being 2 to 3 whole eggs in a meal. For some, closer to 3 or 4, depending on the rest of their daily protein intake. This is not a strict rule carved in stone. It is a functional range based on how your body actually responds. Save this video right now, honestly. You are going to want to come back to the exact numbers and the preparation details once you start trying this yourself. Now, here is where the benefit so often gets quietly canceled out, and it usually is not the egg's fault at all. Mistake number 1. Pairing eggs with processed meats, refined bread, or sugary drinks. In that context, your blood sugar spikes faster, and regular processed meat intake has been linked to higher cardiovascular risk. Your body stops responding to the egg by itself and starts responding to the whole pattern around it. When eggs are paired instead with fiber-rich vegetables or whole food carbohydrates, the response becomes far more stable. Blood sugar rises more gradually. You stay fuller longer. Mistake number 2, removing the yolk. I know this one feels familiar, but the majority of the valuable nutrients in an egg, the choline, the lutein, the zeaxanthin, the fat-soluble vitamins, live almost entirely in the yolk. Strip it away, and you are left with protein and very little else. If you are tossing the yolk specifically to avoid cholesterol, you are throwing away nearly all of the vision protection that made the egg worth eating in the first place. Mistake number 3, cooking method. High heat over a long time can break down sensitive compounds like lutein and zeaxanthin. That does not mean a cooked egg is a problem. It means preparation matters. Poaching, soft boiling, or a gentle, lower heat scramble tends to preserve more of these nutrients than a hard, overcooked yolk. Mistake number 4, timing that ignores how your body actually responds to protein. Many people only think of eggs at breakfast. But what matters more is when your body is most ready for protein, which is often after a long stretch without food, like overnight. That said, eggs can be just as useful later in the day if your earlier meals were light on protein. It is not about tradition. It is about function. Mistake number 5, and this one surprises most people. Skipping eggs entirely on the days you feel busy or rushed and replacing them with something convenient but nutritionally empty, like a granola bar or a piece of toast with jam. I understand the appeal. It is faster. But your body does not pause its need for muscle maintenance and macular protection just because your morning is hectic. If you are someone who values understanding the why behind these choices, this part matters. Consistency is what makes any of this work. A single excellent breakfast on a Sunday does not undo 5 rushed mornings of nutritionally empty food during the week. The body responds to patterns repeated over weeks and months, not isolated good days. Here's something I get asked constantly, and it deserves a straight answer. Does the type of egg you buy actually matter? Eggs labeled omega-3 enriched typically come from hens fed a diet higher in flaxseed or algae, and research suggests these eggs can carry meaningfully higher omega-3 content, which supports the same anti-inflammatory goals I described earlier. Free-range and pasture-raised eggs sometimes show modestly higher levels of certain nutrients, including vitamin D and some carotenoids, though the research here is less consistent than people assume, and the difference is not dramatic enough to mean a conventional egg is somehow without value. If cost is a concern, and for many people on a fixed income, it absolutely is, a conventional whole egg still delivers nearly all of the benefits I have covered today. Do not let the marketing on the carton convince you that only the most expensive option counts. The yolk, not the label, is doing the heavy lifting. Now, beyond eggs themselves, a few practical pieces tie this all together. First, build the meal around the egg instead of treating it as an afterthought. Pair it with vegetables or whole food carbohydrates rather than refined ones. Second, aim for consistency. Your body responds to repeated patterns, not the occasional egg here and there. Third, mind your preparation. Gentle heat preserves more of what makes the yolk worth eating. Fourth, look at your total daily protein. Eggs are a strong foundation, but combining them with other sources, like fish, legumes, or dairy, helps you reach what your body actually needs across the day. And fifth, stay flexible on timing. Eggs do not have to live only at breakfast. They are most useful wherever protein quality matters most in your day. Before you go, I want to know 2 things from you. First, how many whole eggs are you eating in a typical week right now? Just the number. Second, have you been eating whites only, or whole eggs, yolk, and all? Just tell me whites or whole. Because based on everything I just covered, removing the yolk is the single most common mistake that strips eggs of almost everything they offer for your vision and your brain. So let's bring this together, in case you joined partway through. After 60, your body responds to food differently than it used to. Eggs are one of the most efficient sources of 3 things your body increasingly depends on. High biological value protein to fight anabolic resistance and protect your muscle. Choline to support memory and focus. And lutein and zeaxanthin from the yolk to protect the macula and support your vision as you age. I know what some of you are thinking right now. This sounds too simple. Surely something this ordinary, sitting in your refrigerator right now, costing a fraction of what a single bottle of supplements costs, cannot really matter this much. I understand that instinct. You have likely been trained to expect that meaningful health changes require something complicated, something expensive, something with a brand name on the bottle. But biology does not actually work that way. Sometimes the most useful tool is the one that has been sitting in plain sight the entire time, just used incorrectly for 20 years. Some of you are also wondering where the catch is. Why isn't every doctor saying this if it is really this straightforward? Honestly, some are starting to. Guidelines do eventually catch up to research, just slower than anyone would like, and slower than your body can afford to wait. In the meantime, the responsible thing I can do is hand you what the published research actually says, clearly, and let you bring it into the conversation with your own doctor rather than wait years for it to trickle down on its own. The cholesterol fear has largely shifted. For most healthy adults, moderate egg intake is not associated with increased heart disease risk, especially inside an overall diet that is balanced and minimally processed. The pattern around the egg matters more than the egg itself. 4 mistakes quietly erase the benefit: pairing eggs with processed meats and refined carbohydrates, throwing away the yolk, overcooking it at high heat, and treating eggs as a small extra instead of the protein anchor of your meal. For most healthy adults after 60, the functional range lands around 2 to 4 whole eggs in a meal, paired with vegetables, prepared at moderate heat, kept consistent across the week. Now, let me be honest with you about what the first couple of weeks can actually feel like, because I think this matters more than people realize. Week 1, you might not notice much at all. That is normal. Your body is not used to this much usable protein at once, and for some people, that means feeling a little fuller than expected, or noticing digestion adjusting for a few days. Stick with it. Week 2, this is usually when people start to report small things: steadier energy in the afternoon, slightly less brain fog by mid-morning. Nothing dramatic yet. Week 3 is often where things start to click. This is the point where many people tell me the stairs feel a little easier, or that their eyes feel less strained reading in the evening. Week 4 and beyond, if you have stayed consistent, this is where the real, measurable shift tends to show up, the kind Sandra described. I want you to remember something important here. Most people give up after 3 or 4 days because nothing feels different yet. But your muscles and your retina do not rebuild overnight. They rebuild over weeks with consistent signal. The fact that change feels slow does not mean it is not happening. I will admit something to you, honestly. The taste of a soft boiled egg yolk every single morning takes a little getting used to if you grew up eating only the whites. A few of my patients told me the texture felt strange at first. That is a normal adjustment, not a sign that something is wrong. Give your palate a couple of weeks the same way you are giving your body a couple of weeks. I also want to be specific about safety, because that matters more to me than views. If you are on a cholesterol-lowering medication, like a statin, please understand that eggs are not a replacement for that medication, and you should never stop or reduce a prescribed medication without talking to your doctor first. This is simply additional, complementary information. If you have a known egg allergy, none of this applies to you, and you should avoid eggs entirely. If you have a diagnosed lipid disorder, like familial hypercholesterolemia, your response to dietary cholesterol may be very different from what I described today, and you need an individualized plan from your physician. And if you ever notice unusual swelling, chest discomfort, or a sudden change in how you feel after a meal, that is not something to wait out. Call your doctor. This is general, educational information based on published research and clinical patterns I have seen repeatedly. It is not a diagnosis, and it does not replace a conversation with your own doctor, especially if you live with diabetes, a lipid disorder, or a family history of very high cholesterol. Bring this video to your next appointment. Print out the sources below and ask your doctor what they think. A good doctor welcomes that conversation. So tonight, or with tomorrow's breakfast, try this. 2 whole eggs, soft, boiled, or poached, with sautéed greens and a piece of whole grain toast. Watch how you feel over the next 2 weeks, not the next 2 days. Give your body the time it actually needs to respond. And if you know someone who has been quietly avoiding eggs for years because of advice from a decade that has already passed, send them this video today. The science has moved forward. Their body's needs have moved forward too. The advice they were given simply has not caught up yet. Do not let anyone tell you it is too late, because it is not. Take care of those eyes, that brain, and that body that has carried you this far. And before I go, here is something to think about until next time. eggs are not the only piece of decades-old advice that may be quietly working against you. There is another everyday food, something most people eat without a second thought, where the guidance handed down to your generation has also shifted in ways almost nobody has explained clearly. I will walk you through exactly what that is and what the current research actually shows very soon. And I will see you in the next one.